I think I felt too that the psychological and emotional change that comes with veganism had not been covered as much in what I was reading. I was seeing more either the physical health changes and or strictly the ethics, but not so much about how are we changed when we start to align with our vegan ethics.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse. Hey Posse, I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse, bringing vegans together to help animals everywhere. First up, the first ever Vegan Posse Soiree is coming up this Wednesday, April 16th, 2025 at 10 a.m. Central via Zoom. Join us if you can. The link is below. Totally free, totally fun, and can't wait to see you all in person. You are the posse. Next, if you still haven't gotten a copy of the vegan women's fiction classic, Marrying Myself, by me, Christine Melanie Benson, what are you waiting for? Grab a copy at Amazon or at my website, christinemelaniebenson.com, and help make it an international bestseller. Together, let's normalize veganism through the arts. Third, please join me and lots of other amazing people at this year's Vegan Summerfest, July 9th through the 13th in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Summerfest is the longest running vegan conference in the U.S., and it's tons of fun with incredible speakers and even more incredible all vegan food. It's really an experience like no other. When you register, make sure to let them know that you're with Chrissy Benson and the Vegan Posse, and they'll be extra nice to you. And in case you don't know this about me, I've been an internal family systems therapy practitioner since 2014, and I coach and counsel people from all over the country and even the world. If you're interested in coaching that will not only get you somewhere, but get you somewhere you want to go, email me at christinembenson@gmail.com. Last but not least, if you value what we do here at the Vegan Posse, bringing vegans together to help animals everywhere, consider supporting us financially through PayPal or Venmo. You can send your contribution to Vegan Posse, all one word. Feel free to buy me a virtual coffee, chip in for recording expenses, or even make it a monthly donation. Again, at whatever level you're able to support us, we appreciate you. And now for this week's episode. My friend and mentor, Victoria Moran, has introduced me to all kinds of incredible people, and psychologist Dr. Angela Crawford is one of them. The last time I spoke with Angela, she was finishing up her book, The Vegan Transformation, and now that book is about to hit the shelves, which is super exciting. For many of us, myself included, we didn't know what we were in for when we made that vegan leap. I knew it would be a big change, but I didn't realize how cosmic a change it would be. Indeed, it was one that transformed my life in ways I could never have predicted. In her book, The Vegan Transformation, Dr. Angela Crawford discusses the power of veganism for personal transformation, both from her own experience and that of many other vegans. And she does it in a truly engaging, inspiring way. So enjoy this conversation with Dr. Angela Crawford and make sure to pre-order The Vegan Transformation. Okay. Angela, welcome back to the Vegan Posse. Are you ready for the ride of your life?
Yeah, I am.
So congratulations on your new book, The Vegan Transformation. As an author myself, I know firsthand the challenges of getting a book out into the world. And in many ways, what I found is that writing the book is the easy part. So I've been lucky enough to get an advanced copy of The Vegan Transformation and really enjoyed it. It's got such an interesting perspective with a mix of your own personal story of transformation and the research you did with other vegans about their journeys. So, where did you come up with that approach?
Yeah, I had the idea or image of writing this type of book for a while, even before I became vegan. I think in part because I did research early on in my psychology career that involved structured interviews with people in different areas. Like my dissertation, for example, was an area that I didn't end up continuing to work in, but it was with bulimics and interviewing them on their journeys of healing. So I'd always liked that style of research. And then I also at one point was a journalism major. So, and then being, in psychotherapy, it involved a lot of interviews. So I've always enjoyed interviewing people and hearing their stories, as I know you probably can relate to with
Yeah,
your
me
work.
too.
So I thought for a long time that would be a style of book I would write sometime, but I didn't know what the topic was until I became vegan. And once I became vegan, it was such a change in my own life. Even though I'd been vegetarian for many years, there was something about becoming vegan that took me to a different level. It was a different level of commitment, a different level of rising to a new place of standing for what I believed in a different way than even maybe when I was vegetarian. And so as I had to navigate social situations and speak up and, share my own reasons for change and try to handle situations where other people didn't maybe get it, there were changes that happened in me. And as I learned more about veganism too, I just saw that it had such an impact on so many things I cared about. Animals, obviously, the planet, human health, just so many different areas. So it just, in so many ways, it transformed me, and I felt like it could transform the things I cared about. And then as I got to know more vegans, I saw other vegans seem to have some of those same feelings as I met different ones all over the world. So it was something I wanted to explore. And I think I felt too that the psychological and emotional change that comes with veganism had not been covered as much in what I was reading. I was seeing more either the physical health changes and or strictly the ethics, but not so much about how are we changed when we start to align with our vegan ethics.
Yeah, that's so interesting the way you put it. And it really is true. I had the same experience in many ways. And just the whole concept of living in alignment with our values in such a tangible way, to literally embody our values through the food that we take in, which becomes us. Yeah, it's very powerful. Like you, I didn't realize the extent of the change that would transpire. I was just thinking about the whole concept of values. The whole concept tends to sometimes come tinged with this concept of morality and being a good person. And what was interesting for me to reflect on, and your book helped me do this, was just how values really are also a key to our happiness. Because if we're not happy, if we're not satisfied with the life that we're living, often that points to an area where there's a gap between the values we hold and how we're living. And so when you look at it that way, it becomes less about any sort of moral judgment and just more a path to happiness and fulfillment. But in talking to the vegans that you interviewed, what were some of the biggest surprises or just things that you learned from hearing their experiences?
What you just said about values, I think that was one aspect of the conversations and the general trends in the surveys that surprised me in some ways. Because, values are not, I don't know, it's not something that you hear people talk about all the time when they talk about living a fulfilling life or a meaningful life. I mean, you hear it sometimes, and maybe in our field, both of us, training in psychotherapy, that you might hear about values there. But in the general world, it's not always talked about a lot. And yet, the vast majority of the people I interviewed said that that the thing that was probably most transformative for them was this tangible alignment with values that you just mentioned. And so I think this idea that actually it was so tied to positive interchanges like fulfillment and authenticity and peace, all these different ways that this act of, okay, now I realize I wasn't so aligned with my values in this area of my life by what I was eating and other purchases as well. And now that I've made the connection and I'm doing something different, a few people said things like a weight lifted that I didn't even know was there. So
Mm,
I think, there were other surprises too, but I think how significant the values piece was not only in becoming vegan, but in changing people, inwardly in positive
mm.
ways that they recognized.
Right, right. Like a piece they didn't realize was missing until they found it.
Yes. And I can really identify with that because I think, first even just becoming vegetarian and then later vegan, I felt all this freedom. It's just, it's weird how like people think it's restrictive, but if they're not vegan yet, and I know I once thought it would be, but
Hmm.
when I became vegetarian and then vegan and stopped eating meat and then the other animal products too, there was this freedom, like, I don't know, this lightness that I don't have to participate in this anymore. Before I thought I had to. Now I know I don't. And it's just freeing in some way that I don't have to go along with something that at some level I must not have felt so okay with, but I just rationalized or believed I needed to.
Right. And I think that's just a great point to highlight is that people do think of veganism as restrictive and no one wants anyone telling them what to eat. But you kind of point to the reality that we didn't choose to start eating these products. No one asked us if we were okay with this violent food system that we have and if we wanted to participate in it. And once we learn we have the option of of opting out, I mean, yeah, it's great news. It's freeing. So the last time that you were on the Vegan Posse, you did share about your personal vegan journey. But why don't you talk a little about that just to refresh people's memories? Because I do recall that like me, you were a vegetarian for a long time before going vegan.
Yes, I
And
was.
yeah, so tell us about that path, that trajectory.
Yeah, it was a little different than I think some other people's paths in that it started with awareness about the workers in meat processing plants through a program I happened to see, back in late 2006. And, even though it didn't show much about what happened in this quote unquote meat processing plant, it showed enough about the workers' lives and how they were injured and, just some unjust aspects of their working environment that it got me thinking about how my food got to me. And that was enough to make me start exploring and to start thinking, something just shifted in me that I don't know that I want to support this industry. And I wanted to learn more. And as I learned more, I quickly discovered, what happens with the animals and learned about factory farming, something that I hadn't, I grew up in the Midwest. Why didn't I not know about factory farming? But I
Mm.
didn't. I had no idea, and not that other things are much better, but factory farming does dominate the animal agriculture at this point. So, as I learned about that and what happened to the animals and the whole process, and then, I started trying out plant based cooking and discovered, wow, I actually liked it, as I was not a cook before. And now all of a sudden I liked, trying new recipes, something that I don't know, I couldn't convince myself to do before. I just hated cooking. But now all of a sudden it was sort of an adventure to try new things. And the plant colors were so vibrant and trying new ingredients. So just all these things came together. And, over time, I learned more about all the different aspects. I learned more about the health aspects and having a family history of heart disease that, I was lessening my risk of that. So it wasn't like I was hurting myself in the process, which wasn't the key point for me, but it was still helpful to know. And
Yeah.
And it's been part of, the health thing has been important to me in the sense that, working as a psychologist, I had a lot of clients that had medical issues, and I have family history of heart disease. So I've been concerned about people around me that maybe don't have to be sick, if they also knew more about plant-based nutrition. So that's mattered to me too. And I think over time, as I learned all the different reasons, the thing that has always kept me first vegetarian, then vegan, is just thinking of the animals, because I have this visceral connection now with what happens there. But all the other reasons are nice to know too, because it sort of becomes this all encompassing, lifestyle change. So it took me a while, as you said, then to become vegan. That was, I don't know. I can't, I think it was just the social thing for me more than anything that made that take a while. But eventually, 6+ years ago, I was ready to take that on. Maybe I'd done enough inner growth that I wasn't going to let the social obstacles hold me back. And I dove into learning more what happened to dairy cows and egg laying hens. And that pushed me over the edge to then, okay, now I'm fully vegan.
Wow. Yeah. So, yeah, talk a little more about the social aspect of it, because I think obviously that's perhaps the hugest piece for people. People who maybe can get on board with veganism intellectually and philosophically, putting it into practice is just much more challenging because people want to fit in and they want to be able to enjoy themselves without thinking about heavy topics. So, yeah,
Yeah.
talk a little more about that if you would.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is so key, Chrissy, because I think a lot of us like to think we're individualists, and we don't care what other people think, and maybe some people are like that, and maybe even go to the other extreme, like I don't care at all what anybody thinks.
Right.
But really, most of us are socialized and conditioned, to care what other people think, and we're kind of wired to care what other people think from a long-standing, you know, evolutionary standpoint. So we're just kind of wired to want to connect with the tribe and to fit in with our social networks. And for many people, it can be really hard to be different or to stand out or to go a different path than the majority of people around you are going. And so, and research does really support what you were just saying. As I was doing research for the book, some of the different studies I found that the biggest reason ex-vegans were no longer vegan, it seemed to be different social factors for the most part. Just the very things that we were just mentioning, than, not wanting to be different or have to navigate social situations. So yeah, for me personally, that looked like, going to a family gathering, and, I'd first with the meat had to speak up and say, I'm no longer eating meat. And people at first not understanding that, and, saying things like, oh, you're losing too much weight, or, just different stuff like that in the beginning when I was vegetarian. And then over time, people got used to that, and I got used to speaking up, and that became more comfortable. But then being vegan, all of a sudden it was like, okay, now it's like I'm at a family birthday party, and they would always have a cake. And of course, the cake wasn't vegan. And so I'd just become vegan. And just like, I don't want to like disrupt the whole, family gathering, with, with everything I was discovering about, because I was still processing everything that I was learning about what happens in those industries. So it was just kind of, stepping back and realizing, okay, this is a process. I have to like just have a plan of how to deal with it, and it should be straightforward. I'm a psychologist, I help other people with communication, but for some reason I had to step back and just really think about it, and then just realize, okay, you approach someone ahead of time. You don't just like have to do it right at the middle of the gathering. You let them know I have a change in what I'm eating now. So it was just a process of, how do I navigate the social situations and honor my connections with people, but also honor my own values and my own wishes, and over time share more with people about it. And, so it just was a process. I think, like so many of us, I just was used to eating the way everyone else around me ate. And so suddenly changing that just took some, I guess, strengthening some inner skills, which seems like
Mm.
that should come naturally, but doesn't for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And what toll or effect did, and does your veganism have on your social connections? Did you notice that it made you feel more disconnected from people you cared about or more connected to other people?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So, on the positive side, I discovered this whole network of other vegans that, that has been, and I do share about that in the book as one of the things that a lot of vegans shared with me as being so transformative is so
Mm.
this positive discovery that like there's other vegans all over the world and around you that, usually, often connecting like online because, you may not have them in your immediate community, but um, but just meeting all these people that I never would have met otherwise across the globe that share this connection. So that part has been really amazing. And then, even a few local friends that are vegan that, just it's just wonderful because when you're with them, they just totally get it. And, you can just, and I collaborate with a lot of other vegans on different projects, and so that's really been great. But in terms of my own social connections, it's been good and then challenging. I'd say on the positive side that, people have been really supportive. Once I've, kind of worked through my own feelings about it all and could just share like why this was important to me and kind of thinking of Dr. Melanie Joy, like building vegan allies. Um, and kind of that concept is this idea that like we want to change people because we want the world to be vegan, and yet not everybody is ready to be changed. And so the idea of building vegan allies is sort of like asking people in your life to be a support to your journey, even if they're not ready or willing to be vegan or plant-based themselves. So I think by me having more of that approach, just more sharing why this mattered to me and what I was learning and discovering, and being willing to invite people in but not being pushy about it if someone wasn't open. I think I've had some pretty good support. And then for me, my book is like my activism. I'm not a great activist in other ways, but by my writing a book and then like teaching food for life classes in my community, things like that, those are my ways of sharing it. And overall people are supportive and even interested. I was really thrilled last summer. We had a family cookout, and for the first time, and this is, 6 years of being vegan, everybody brought something vegan to share. Like,
Aw.
they're all not vegan. So, except for my husband. So that was really exciting because past gatherings, I would always just have to make sure I brought a lot of stuff to make sure that there were
Yeah.
vegan things. So that was like positive. But there are times I do feel left out, or there's time like we'll eat out somewhere for one of those birthday gatherings, and there might not be much on the menu, and just, I don't know, just watching what everyone else is eating. There's just, those times are hard.
Yes. Yes. Well, you mentioned your husband, but yeah, how did he share in this journey? Or, was he an ally? Was he a convert? What role did he play?
Yeah, he's been really good. He many years ago before we met had tried out a vegetarian lifestyle after reading Diet for a Small Planet.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was trying to think. That wasn't Diet for a New America. It was Diet for a Small Planet, which
Right.
talked about more like the sustainability aspect of what we're eating. And
Mhm.
so he had tried it out. So he was already open, but then didn't maintain it just because I think social stuff, life.
Mhm.
But then when I became vegetarian, and I would just like tell him everything I was reading and everything I was learning, and he was right on board. And so he would eat vegetarian with me. And then the same with vegan. I think the vegan was a little harder because he was really addicted to half and half in his coffee
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and certain other things. But I think as I showed him some of the documentaries, and then I had a friend who was a vegan educator, and hearing it from someone besides me about some of the health aspects and other things, um, and he's certainly compassionate to animals too. So, he has gone along, and I would say he's maybe not 100% vegan, and that if we were at that social gathering and there was a piece of non-vegan cake, he might have a bite of it. But he's at home 100% vegan and really
Mhm.
he's definitely an ally, and he definitely gets it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting, like the approach that you mentioned in terms of asking people to support you in your journey as opposed to necessarily being ready to support the animals themselves. It is such an interesting angle. And I agree that often it's effective and it's helpful. But I myself, and I'm curious your feelings on this. I myself sometimes get frustrated when I'm sort of placed into that dynamic. For instance, years ago when I was living in Boston, a friend was getting married and she said to me, she said, "Oh, I want to make sure that we have some vegetarian and vegan options at the wedding for people like you because I want to make sure that you feel included and have something to eat." And I just remember in that moment feeling so frustrated because, I wanted to say to her, and maybe I even did say this to her. Hopefully, I found a kind way to do it because even though I appreciated the consideration, I wanted to say, don't do it for me, do it for the animals. I'm fine. I'm fine. I can survive for the duration of a wedding. So tell me your thoughts on that. Or
Yeah, no, I can resonate with that 100%. I think as I'm thinking of what I described to you, that was in the very early stages of me trying to share this path with other people. I also had times where I would, like, depending on who the person was, describe what I was discovering or learning. For example, I was early on the vegan part of my journey. I was reading the book Slaughterhouse, which is it's basically a book that where the author was a journalist who interviewed people who work in slaughterhouses, and it shared,
oh,
not only their experiences but what actually happens with the animals, and many of them not really feeling very okay with what was happening, but feeling like kind of this was the work environment they were in. But reading it and just how horrible some of what I learned was about the whole slaughter process and the animals not always being adequately stunned and just all this stuff, it was just so distressing. So I remember having dinner with a friend and right after I became vegan and just telling her everything I'd learned in that book. I'm not sure how she felt about it. So I totally get it. And I have times I feel just what you're describing. Like I'm thinking of a relative that bought some clothing many years ago that had fur in it, and she just recently pulled it out and was like talking about, oh, I should wear this again. And I'm like, you're gonna wear that? Like I was just like, I could not believe it. And I
right,
said
right.
something really snarky. So it's just like, I totally get it. I feel what you're describing. And it's just this balance kind of like of my own feelings about it and then what is effective and just trying to navigate all of that because I don't always know the answer of what is effective. But as a human, I'm going to sometimes get annoyed or upset and even say things that are not very nice because we see things, we see what happens to the animals in a way that other people just don't, and a way that I once didn't. Maybe because I'm a new enough vegan, that is part of why I'm not as in your face as some, but I don't know. Or maybe that doesn't make sense because sometimes as a new vegan, that's when we're really in people's faces. I don't know. Maybe it's just my personality.
Yeah, well, you don't seem like a snarky person.
I have my moments, but I never feel good about it. I think because there's this wiring in me that connection is really important. So it's sort of like if I'm still wanting, unless that person's a total person that I don't want to be connected to, I'm concerned also about how do I say my truth, but also stay connected. So that's just kind of part of me.
Yeah.
And maybe that's my background as a psychologist too.
And just being an agreeable, connective sort. Yeah, that makes sense. And the reality too is that that's generally not the way to get a message across either, is by being snarky. We can feel like, I know I can feel a victory in the moment. It can feel very satisfying in that particular moment, like, oh, I really landed just a very timely zinger, but it doesn't necessarily, in fact, probably doesn't help my cause or my case.
Yeah, because I think, understanding like Dr. Melanie Joy's work with her book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and We're Cows, has helped me a lot. Because I think in the beginning, becoming vegetarian, for example, I would just be really annoyed. Like, I see this now. Why don't other people see this? And, what happens to animals? And I'd just be annoyed. I think over time, I've just become more understanding that we are just so conditioned to
Yeah.
not see it, to not connect with it. And if we do, to kind of dismiss it because like it's normal, natural, and necessary, quote unquote.
Right. And it still remains fascinating to me how people just don't want to see it. They don't want to hear it. And I've become so attuned to anytime the subject comes up in conversation, which, had a conversation yesterday where it came up just having coffee with a friend. And I could just literally see her eyes just glaze over, and it wasn't like I was talking for minutes on end. It was just, a couple of things, but I could just see the
Something about the
disconnect.
animals or about
Yeah, I was because the subject of veganism came up and I just asked where she is on that issue, which is something that I've started asking more instead of just launching in terms of how I feel about it, what I think, just offering the other person and also hopefully encouraging them to consider where they do stand because many people wouldn't necessarily identify as, standing anywhere on that
yeah.
spectrum of animal agriculture.
Well, that's really cool that you asked. I think like being proactive like that and raising the question because you're right, it's just so seldom thought about.
Yeah. So, but it is just funny. People just don't want to hear it. But like you're getting at too, we all have our individual timelines. I didn't go vegan until I was in my 40s. And who am I to judge or claim that someone should be further along than I was when I was their age? Yeah, it's interesting. But so yeah, I'd love to hear more about the process of developing this book. So it sounds like the idea was brewing for a long time. You said even before you went vegan to write a book of this nature. So I'm curious about that. What you wanted to just basically have a book where you were interviewing people about a particular subject and getting their thoughts.
Yeah, I was interested, definitely in things like healing and transformation. But
Oh, okay. So transformation itself was something you'd been thinking about.
yeah, as I think back to my training as a psychologist and the things that have interested me, I mean, a lot of it is things like personal growth and how do we develop and grow and change. And then I had just before I became vegan, I had taken a transformational coaching certification. And I think that transformational coaching, even though I had a strong background already as a psychologist, it just added some new layers to my own development. And
Mm,
I think it led me to start to look at ways that I was conflict avoidant or people pleasing, even though I
mm,
didn't really actually think of myself that way, because I've always been pretty independent. I've always done my own path, even if it was different than other people. But as I was in the transformational coaching program where you're getting trained to work with other clients on these methods, but you're also working on yourself. And so in
mm,
working on myself, I realized there were ways that I was avoiding being different or conflict in certain areas. And I think as I worked through that, I think I had what I thought of as social anxiety. And what I realized through that inner work was it was really more about when I was in a situation where I felt pulled in different directions by different expectations, and that would
huh,
create this sense of anxiety. And so, as I worked through
huh,
that and started to learn how to stay present in my own body and include my own needs and my own wishes in those moments where I was overstimulated with too much, I guess, expectation or conflict around me, I was able to then stand more for what I believed in areas where it was harder. And so then I think that gave me the muscle to then look at this veganism thing and say, here's an area where you're not yet fully in alignment with what you know.
mm,
Because I knew enough at that point to know how the animals were treated in those other industries. I just hadn't made as much of an emotional connection yet with that as I had with the meat.
mhm,
So that inner journey of transformation for myself and being willing to stay present with myself and then handle all these differing uh, as an empath, I feel different things around me, maybe not
mm,
everybody feels. And so like I can feel different feelings and expectations that people have. And so I guess being just more mindful of that and that didn't have to affect me so much and that I could be more grounded when that was happening. And so I think now that laid the foundation for becoming vegan. And so that was part of how veganism was transformative for me, is like honoring my truth, even if it's different than the people around me. And then learning how do I do that in a way that still honors, like we talked about, the connections with people. I think that's so important, because we can be vegan and just like not care what anybody thinks and be in a vegan bubble. But we're not going to transform people around us if we're not willing to be in relationship with people and find ways to connect with them. So I think all those inner transformations led to my curiosity to then take this idea that I had about transformation in general, and then how does vegan transform us? And there's obviously many other ways in addition to that, but that was one of the ways. So that led me
That's
to want to study it more.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, for one, that's fascinating to me that you were reading this as social anxiety, and then when you really like examined it, it was being pulled in different directions. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I felt, fairly competent and confident in a lot of areas of my life. I'd, been developed as a psychologist. I had a good, work relationship with my clients. Things were going well in many ways, but I would find certain situations where suddenly I wouldn't be that calm, confident person as much. I'd just feel anxious or irritated. And usually there were social situations where there was a lot going on. Like maybe there was something I needed to accomplish, but someone else was wanting something else from me. Or there might be two different people that were wanting different things from me at the same time. And I think somehow, I don't know, it's really an interesting thing. I think because of being that empath, I was wired to like kind of tune into what everyone around me was expecting.
Mm,
And I'd learned early on, these are all things I discovered. I'd learned early on how to, meet the expectations around me. And then somewhere along the way, learn to meet my needs around that. So it was just, this was all like a discovery as I did inner work around why am I feeling anxious in these situations,
mm,
and, sort of irritated and overwhelmed. And so doing some inner exploration and the different, I did work that's sort of similar to internal family systems. It wasn't exactly that, but
mhm,
looking at the different parts of me that were having reactions in these situations and discovering
mm,
what they were saying, what they were feeling, and just in time learning how to kind of be grounded and connect with what I really wanted to need, and hold that, along with what other people were wanting or expecting. But and also to, to speak up more, because people couldn't see where I was at, because I wasn't showing that.
mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So learning to
A
speak up,
lot.
and yeah,
Yeah.
it was a lot. It's just those of us that are in this field, I guess, a lot of times love doing this kind of inner work.
Right. Well, we tend to have a rich inner world. And sometimes, sometimes we don't navigate it all in the best way in terms of how it intersects with the external worlds. But
True.
it's so interesting. And regarding internal family systems therapy, IFS therapy, which, as you know, it's something that I trained in years ago, back in 2013. And I've been, seeing clients in that capacity for a long time. But I had a client just the other day mention to me that she was listening to an IFS podcast, which I want to check this out for myself. I have not yet done so, but she said she was listening to a podcast, and the woman on the podcast, an IFS professional, was saying that she had a vegan client who just insisted that she couldn't be truly happy until the world was vegan, and that she had told her clients that you are just never going to heal until you let go of your vegan agenda. And my client, having listened to this, was, provoked and annoyed and just, triggered by this comment, and was asking me what I thought of it. And I certainly had plenty of feelings about it, but my biggest comment was, well, number one, she's not a vegan, so she doesn't understand. So that's the first thing to keep in mind, is she's saying this, but she hasn't experienced like you call it, the transformation. So she's living in a different reality. But in doing your book and creating this book, what sort of transformation did you undergo, if any, in writing this book and researching it?
Mm. Wow, it was a really cool experience. First, it started with surveys I created a survey and reached out to people via different vegan networks I was in and on some different social media and invited people to complete the survey. And then from that survey, I then invited a certain, 75 of them for interviews. And the interviews were just so fascinating. I just like a lot of times I might not want to get up or stay up late, get up early or stay up late. But for these interviews, if someone was in another part of the country where I needed to do that, I didn't mind doing it because it was just
Mm,
so engaging and just the commonality of this shared value of veganism, but then with their unique experience. I just loved
mm,
the interviews. So every part of the process was really engaging and interesting for me. And then kind of pulling together the core themes that came from both the interviews and the surveys and coding, the responses to see what was most prominent. And I enjoyed that. And then the writing was a little harder. To get focused, I will say, when it came to that point, especially because in the beginning I was still working full time for part of that. And it was challenging. But when I got to only like 6 months before it was due to my publisher, that was like when I really focused on the writing and just it became a job. And I think what I discovered was like, in my head, I'd been telling myself, like, you're no good at this writing piece because you're just not focused and you're getting distracted by all these other things. But when it came time that there was a deadline and I was closer to that deadline and I cleared some things out of my life, I learned what I had to do to make it happen. I set up my
mm.
life to make it happen. And, I
That's a
wrote
good
it.
feeling, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a process, creating an outline and then from that outline, creating, the chapter outlines and then fleshing them out and then eventually
Yeah.
trying to create something more finished from all that.
Right. No, it's got a very interesting and just natural structure to it. I'm curious, like, who would you say you wrote this book for? Is this
Hmm.
for the vegan curious, or do you see this as primarily being for people who are already vegan?
I think there were two groups definitely. So one group that was in my mind were the vegan curious. I have a lot of friends locally that are not vegan that I either knew through my church or through just different my work. People that are compassionate and in some cases spiritual and sometimes health conscious, but not on this path as a vegan. And some who I'd met through the transformational coaching, compassionate women that cared about improving the world, but just this connection had not been made.
Mm,
So some of it was definitely, and I think that may be the biggest group in a way, because I really, as you might have seen, tried to write it in a way that it's not at all judgmental and is more inviting.
yes, and
Um,
it really is. Yes.
But I was also thinking of vegans I knew because I'm myself always growing. I myself am always wanting to stretch and learn more. I don't
Mm-hmm.
stop reading vegan books, now that I'm vegan.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it helps me stay more committed. It helps me be inspired. It helps me know even more of the reasons that this lifestyle is so important. So I was also thinking of some of the vegans I knew, especially those that are also like growth oriented like that,
Yeah.
that we're always wanting to grow and learn more and be even better human beings and better in our advocacy. And
Yeah. That makes sense. And yes, your cohort of people who are interested in the concept of transformation, that definitely seems like a perfect target audience for this.
yeah,
Because if people are genuinely interested in transformation, similarly with compassion or justice, if they're genuinely interested in those areas, then at least in theory, they'll be interested in learning one more area where they can actively apply them with
Yeah.
great effect.
Yeah.
How have they responded to your book, or have you had a chance yet to really gauge that?
Well, I don't know, but some people that I know from various, some of my non-vegan friends and colleagues have said they've pre-ordered the book. So, we will see. Um, I will say, I wasn't initially going to put in recipes, but it was my, non-vegan, pre-vegan friends that said it has to have recipes. So that's why I invited several of the people that contributed to, offer some recipes. And I got to test them all out. And actually, I really loved them all. They were, even if I was like on the surface thinking it wasn't maybe something I would normally make, when I tried them all out, they were all really good. So it was
That's
fun to test them.
important, yes. Yeah, it's so funny how no matter what the focus of a book, if it's vegan, people expect recipes.
Yes, I think so. And, I think part of that is, and it makes sense, is like if you don't know the how of
Mhm.
how you can carry this lifestyle out, for some people that can make it a burden to even be willing to learn about the why.
The why, yeah.
And,
Yeah.
on my own journey, I later, in retrospect, realized, and I shared this in the book, when I first watched that program about the meat processing plants, I had just 2 months or 3 months before gone to a conference where there was all plant-based food, and it was really good. And I think that was the first time I
Mm.
realized like how someone could be vegetarian or vegan and have it taste good and be doable. So I
Mm.
really like, in retrospect, I really think that watching that played a foundational role in me being receptive to this program and having it change me in a way that it might not have, I'm not sure, if I hadn't seen it as possible.
That's really interesting. That makes sense. I mean, maybe you've heard about the research where they have people watch these graphic videos of, maybe it's slaughterhouses or animal ag, but one set of them watches them while eating a plant-based meal, and one set watches them just having eaten an animal-based meal, and then they gauge how they respond to the cruelty in the videos. And the people who ate the meat and the animal products are much less compassionate for what's happening in the videos, presumably because they can't mentally go there. They can't emotionally go there.
That's so interesting. I've heard of some similar to that, but I hadn't heard that exact one. That sounds so interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm getting some of the details wrong, but that's, yeah, the gist of it. And it sounds like, yeah, you experienced that in a particular way, and going to a whole event that had all
Yes.
plant-based food. Yeah, very interesting. Well, and just what you mentioned about hearing everybody's stories of their own individual journeys. Yeah, I relate to the power of that, because it's so interesting to me. And of course, that was, the fundamental motivator for me in launching the Vegan Posse. As I see it, the Posse already existed, people all over the globe who are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. But in most cases, we don't know each other, and we feel like we're doing it on our own. And it's so interesting to me, like a lot of the vegans that I talk to and whose stories I've heard. And I would include myself in this in some ways, like we kind of arrive at the conclusion independently without, it's not like I had really heard about veganism or even particularly about vegetarianism, but just in my own mind, I had arrived at the conclusion initially, sure, if it were a choice between starving to death and eating an animal, that would be one thing. But in this day and age, when I clearly don't need to do that, how can I possibly justify that decision? And it's always interesting to me to hear the stories of people who just reach that conclusion on their own in solitude, and often only subsequently do they discover, oh, there's a thing called vegan, where there's a whole kind of set of articulated ethics around it that people have thought about and written books around it, but they themselves kind of came up with the idea on their own, which I think is so poignant. It's so beautiful in so many ways because it's so pure, that people really do get there on their own. And at the same time, it's also so poignant because it's so solitary and lonely, that many people feel that they're the only ones. And of course we're not. And like you, I just value the community aspect of it so much. And I'll include in that community historical figures, people who are no longer alive, but who had arrived at that conclusion as well. And I love that I can feel this connection to Leonardo da Vinci and Louisa May Alcott.
Me too. I know. That's why I shared some of their quotes in the book, because for me too, early on when I read about the people you're mentioning, Leonardo da Vinci and others, that even Pythagoras, all that way back, like all these people that advocated for a vegetarian, meat-free lifestyle when it was certainly not easy to do necessarily, and they
Right.
saw the benefits. And so that helps me too. Shows me it has a long history.
Yes, yes. And I love being a part of that history for sure. So you have some just really lovely endorsements and reviews of your book from all these people that, are just so impressive. What was it like for you to just experience that? These really smart, admirable, cool people reading your book and lavishing this, lovely praise on you and it.
Yeah, it meant a lot. We both, of course, know Victoria Moran from being alumni of Main Street Vegan Academy.
Yes,
And
and Victoria's the one who connected us in the first place.
yes, she
Yeah.
is. And she wrote my foreword. And I have to say, when she wrote the foreword, she's such a beautiful writer that she expressed it in a way that, like, it's almost like she said it better than I could have said it myself. The whole key of what the book was about, this transformation process that shifts in many of us as we embark on this lifestyle and dare to really look at the issues that our food choices and other choices impact.
Yeah, and I love that she said, if I recall correctly, she described going vegan like falling in love. Like we can read about it and we can hear about it, but until we experience it, we don't know what it will be like. And I would say I can vouch for that much more so with veganism than the love part. But yeah, it definitely is such a special journey for me, and just much more so than I ever anticipated. I mean, it felt like a daunting, significant change when I did go vegan. It wasn't something it was something I did very reluctantly, to be honest, and was not eager to do it, but just felt like it was the right thing to do. And I'd been avoiding it for too long, and I needed to just, just like stand up and just do it. And
Yeah.
I didn't expect the beauty and the blossoming of the whole transformation and the falling in love part, and just how it would give context and meaning to so much of the
Yeah.
rest of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And in addition to Victoria, there were other, great, Claire Mann, who wrote Dystopia, The Anguish of Being Vegan in a Non-Vegan World. She wrote a beautiful endorsement and has been very supportive in sharing my book with others. So that's been really great. And Robert Cheek, who I met at a Veg Fest last summer and who wrote The Impactful Vegan and the Plant-Based co-wrote The Plant-Based Athlete, had a lot of good success with his writing. All of that, meant a lot, and hoping to share it with a lot of others as well. That's one thing that's cool about the vegan community is we want to support each other because we all want to see this movement have an impact and impact others. And so that's one really cool thing about it, is that aspect.
Very much so. So what sorts of events and, promotions are you doing to get the word out about this book that people should know about?
Well, for one, I'm going to Vegan Summerfest, which you are going to as well, and I
Yes, and we're
hope
going
to
to be
be
doing a
doing.
joint presentation,
Yeah,
fingers crossed, but yes.
exactly. And so hopefully some other presentations as well. And also I'm going to be going to the National Health Association NHA conference. I did a virtual presentation for them as part of their hybrid conference, and then I'll attend the live conference and have a book table there. And I'm
That's
hoping,
awesome. Yeah. I've
yeah,
never been to the NHA conference, but it sounds amazing.
yeah, and then just hopefully some local veg fests as well, and lots of podcasts
Yeah.
and some
Yeah, that's the
other,
best way, of course.
yeah. So that's really cool, and um, yeah, it's exciting. I This whole book launch thing is kind of a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, I know. My book launched, my goodness, it was over 2.5 years ago at this point. But yes, it was definitely a lot. Like I mentioned, to me, I found that in many ways writing the book was the easy part, or just a very different part, I guess
Yes,
is the way to
yes.
say it. Yeah.
Yeah, just realizing if you were going to write a book, you need to be willing to be visible and share it. And it takes a certain amount of energy to do that and a certain amount of
Yes.
effort.
Yes. And I'm sure for you, it helps that you have, a mission. You have
Yes.
people, and non-human people who
Yeah, and it is
benefit.
so
Yeah.
true. That is true because, our topic that we will probably be presenting on together this summer is about writing as advocacy. And for me, it truly is. I identify as an introvert. I'm not one to be doing certain forms of advocacy because I don't, it just doesn't work for me. I would be really depleted and overwhelmed with certain forms of
Yeah.
advocacy that other
Yeah.
people do beautifully. But
Right.
writing and
Right.
sharing and teaching and about what I wrote, that that's what comes more naturally to me. So that's my way of being able to share what matters to me. And I think you and I might have talked about this when we talked the last time. I didn't have a website or do social media or write a blog or anything before I became vegan. There was just something about being vegan that made me willing to take those steps because it just mattered that much.
Right, right. It's so interesting because I of course was the same way. And I think it is a lot of the introverts and maybe the people who are a little less drawn to great visibility in their lives that, notice the other, the huge swath of beings who are completely invisible to most of
Mm.
society, namely farmed animals. Yeah. Yeah. And for me, just reading your book and thinking about these issues, I know it just strikes me, and this is something not the first time that this has hit me, but just on the one hand, there's the wonderful transformation and all the just many, many benefits, spiritual, emotional, physical, just personal, that we humans experience by taking this leap, by making that decision, and by going vegan. And and then on the other hand, it's like, well, great for us, but meanwhile the animals still have it pretty horrible. And so it's just this strange dichotomy, like for me personally, that I live with, just in the sense that I feel so lucky and so grateful to have found this path. And again, good for me, and I'm grateful for it. But meanwhile, these animals, it's not any better for, the cow who's still in that factory farm, or the chickens or pigs, or yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're naming an important paradox. And as I was writing the book, I was really holding those two, I guess, 2 points together that are kind of, balancing each other out. That, on the one hand, this is empowering because we're doing something, what we can, about something that matters to us deeply and that causes, that we know an area that there's a lot of suffering. And yet that suffering is still there. And I become aware of a lot of suffering, of humans too. But then you add in this animal thing, which doesn't, I can't do much about a lot of the human suffering because it's, things that are happening in different parts of the country, or it's, abuse or things that I don't have control over. But what happens to animals, I do, at least in terms of my own choices.
Right.
I don't have control over the bigger picture though. And I think we're just holding these complex feelings of living in a world where there's suffering and a lot of it unnecessary. And how do we hold that and what can we do about it? That's why there was a chapter in the book about authentic fulfillment. And in it, I was really trying to find that balance where we can't claim we're happy all the time because most of us aren't. And especially when we're aware of what's happening.
Right.
Sometimes we're
Right.
brokenhearted. Sometimes we feel just really intense, tough feelings as we're knowing that, yeah, I'm not eating animals, so I'm helping. And yet this is still happening.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's like about how do we hold those intense feelings and yet still keep moving forward, doing the best we can, and even find joy sometimes along the way.
Right. Right. And that's really life in general, what we're trying to do with regard to veganism and animal suffering. That's kind of a microcosm for the human condition itself. We're always trying to find a way to live and find pleasure and joy where it exists, but also not wall ourselves off to the pain and the suffering of other
Yeah.
people's. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Yeah. Do you anticipate writing another book? It feels almost cruel to ask you that when you just,
Well,
finish
when I
this one.
first was writing it, I was like, there's no way I'm ever writing another book. But now that I'm a little further away from the writing process, it's not an impossible thought. It certainly could be possible, just maybe not right away.
Yes, yes, that's fair. That's fair. Well, I'm sure you have just a lot of plans for getting the word out about this one and helping people transform. And hey, who knows? Maybe after this one, another book won't be necessary because the world will go vegan and transform.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, that would be great. Even so, I guess we just keep doing what we can do, right?
Yes, that's what it's all about. Yep. So I've got just a couple more questions for you, but so appreciate you joining us on this really momentous occasion. I mean, that's such an accomplishment after a whole other successful career as a psychologist to suddenly take this on. Just again, I know the work involved and it's a beautiful book, and I can tell you got vulnerable and just put yourself out there and just helped bring the experiences of other people into this to, inform your own. So again, congratulations.
Oh, well,
Well
thank
done.
you.
And
And for anybody that sees it, I'll just hold up the cover.
yes, yeah, it's such a beautiful cover.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was really happy with that.
What's the best place for people to access it or buy it?
A good start would be to go to my website, Angela Crawford, Ph.D.com. I have a book tab, and on the book tab, if you scroll down, it lists several booksellers, but really, I think all major online booksellers are carrying
Mhm.
it. And right now, as far as I understand, it's available for pre order. It's supposed to be released April 26th. And also, I just saw that the Kindle version was available. I'm hoping there will be an Audible or audio book at some point too.
Wonderful. Very exciting. And we'll certainly include all that information in the show notes so that people can get their copy of the vegan transformation and either undergo their own transformation or deepen the one they're already experiencing. So,
Awesome.
final question, Dr. Angela Crawford. If you had to sum up the heart of the vegan transformation in a single sentence or a few words, what would it be?
I know a lot of people use the word compassion, but I do have to throw that in there. I think expanding our circle of compassion and to include, yes, ourselves in the truest form of compassion, that we actually are wanting our greater well being, not just a surface level well being, and
Mm,
then caring for all sentient beings, including those we've disregarded in the past.
right, right. And that when we do that, we ourselves are transformed in ways that we couldn't even predict. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
That's one thing I'd want, those already vegan to do is those who aren't vegan, we need to expand to include all sentient beings, and including those that we've not included before. And we, as you say, transform when we do that. And if we're already vegan, we need to make sure we are including ourselves in a true way, because we are animals too. And if we're not cared for, we're not going to be okay, and we're not going to be as effective for everything that we want to be effective, in impacting. So
Right, right. Well, I wholeheartedly agree, obviously. So, well, thank you again for joining us, and congratulations. And I encourage
thanks for
everybody.
having me. It was
Oh, my
lovely.
pleasure. Yes, and I'm really looking forward to presenting with you at Summerfest. I mean, like you
Yeah,
mentioned, just collaborating with other vegans and like-minded
yeah,
individuals, and you and I have so much in common in terms of,
yes.
the mental health field and writing. So
Mhm.
yeah, very happy to connect with you and continue to work with you. All right. Well, we conclude every episode of the Vegan Posse by taking 30 seconds of silence for all the suffering animals, human and non-human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. So, Angela, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the animals, and we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you, Angela, and thank you, Posse. See you next time. Until then, stay strong and stay true. Yay!